During the company dinner, the wine glass in my hand almost slipped when I saw it. Him. Sitting next to her. Not a coworker, not just any acquaintance, but a man who should never have been there. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and my mind worked at high speed trying to find a logical explanation for it. But there was no logic. There was no justification. Just the raw reality unfolding before my eyes, crushing any shred of security I still had in the marriage I thought was solid. I took a deep breath, clenched my fists and walked to the table. The air around felt thick, suffocating. The voices in the background became a distant murmur. I walked over and stopped next to her. Why are you standing next to her? She's married. I'm her husband. My voice came out firm, sharp, filled with a fury that I could barely control. My eyes alternated between hers, wide and guilty, and his, calm, cold, self-assured. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't look away, he didn't hesitate. On the contrary, a faint smile formed at the corner of his lips before he said without any hesitation, "Actually, she loves me." Time seemed to freeze. Those words penetrated my mind like a sharp blade, tearing apart any illusions I might still have. I felt the ground beneath me wobble, as if everything I had built was crumbling before my eyes. Her look, more than anything, destroyed me. Because there was no shock, no denial, no despair. Just cowardly silence. A silent confession. My breathing became irregular, the blood pulsing in my temples, and every second that passed increased the certainty that this wasn't just a provocation, it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. The hall fell silent. Co-workers watched, some whispered among themselves, others just watched the scene as if it were a show. Maybe it was. A show I never asked to be a part of. She tried to say something, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Maybe because there was nothing to say. Maybe because she knew that any excuse, any attempt to soften the situation, would be useless. There was no way to soften an act of betrayal. There was no justification for the pain that burned in my chest. My hands shook for a moment, my entire body preparing for an explosion that I didn't know how to contain. I could scream, break that entire dinner, punch him, throw wine in her face, anything that corresponded to the avalanche of feelings that consumed me. But then, something inside me reconfigured. I looked around, saw the shocked faces, the expressions of pity, surprise, even satisfaction. Everyone waiting to see my reaction. Waiting for me to humiliate myself, for me to play the role of the betrayed husband, for me to lose myself in fury and do something that would bring me down to their level. But no. My gaze returned to her. For him. For the grotesque scene of two lovers caught, but without any visible regret. Humiliation tried to overwhelm me, but it was swallowed by something bigger. For something that made me make a decision right then and there. I took a deep breath. And then I did something that shocked everyone. Something that no one there expected. Something that changed everything. But before telling you what happened, we need to understand how we got here. Because betrayals don't happen out of nowhere. They are built, fed, cultivated in the silence of nights when one looks at the other and no longer sees each other. They begin long before the forbidden kiss, the shared bed, the lie told. And sometimes, they start when you least expect it. What happened after that night wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something no one could have ever predicted. And in the end, the one who really lost wasn't me. But to understand this, we need to go back. Back to the beginning, to the origin of the betrayal, to the lies that were told before I could even notice them. Because at the end of the day, every betrayal has a price. And the price they paid was much greater than they imagined. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and will never romanticize betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictitious, but they carry a universal truth: betrayal destroys lives, corrupts feelings, and always exacts a high price. The purpose of these narratives is show the real consequences of disloyalty and make you reflect on the pain of those who were betrayed. Now, prepare. You are about to hear a shocking, intense, and full of twists and turns. Every detail will capture your attention, and the ending, well, you'll never forget it. Good story. The company dinner was one of the most anticipated events of the year, a time when everyone came together to celebrate results, toast achievements and reinforce alliances within the corporate environment. The atmosphere was sophisticated, with glasses clinking, smiles being exchanged and lively conversations filling the room decorated with golden tones and soft lights that created a welcoming atmosphere. Among the guests was Daniel, a man who, until then, saw himself as lucky. He had an established career, respect among colleagues and, above all, a marriage that he believed to be solid, built on years of complicity, affection and partnership. Sophia, his wife, was the personification of elegance that night. The red dress highlighted her silhouette, her well-groomed hair flowed over her shoulders and her eyes shone under the warm lighting of the restaurant. They had been together for more than a decade, a couple who had graduated in the halls of university, when they both still dreamed of a bright future full of possibilities. In the early years, life was intense, full of discoveries, travels, laughing late into the night and shared dreams about what they would build together. Time passed and, although the routine had set in, Daniel always believed that the love between them resisted any natural wear and tear of everyday life. He saw Sophia as his life partner, someone who knew his fears, his pains and also his greatest joys. Their relationship has always been stable, at least from Daniel's point of view. There were never explosive fights, nor prolonged arguments, just the normal small disagreements that any couple faces over the years. He liked to think that, even in the face of the rush of everyday life, they still found time for romantic dinners, trips for two and those small gestures that keep the marriage flame burning. That particular night, as he watched her across the table talking to colleagues, he felt proud. Proud to have by his side such a charming woman, so sure of herself, so admired by everyone. Sophia had always been a woman with a strong, independent, determined personality. From the beginning of their relationship, she made it clear that she didn't want to just be someone's wife. He had his own dreams, his career, his ambition. She was talented, she earned respect wherever she went and Daniel never tried to erase that shine, on the contrary, he always encouraged her. It was her autonomy that fascinated him, and even after so many years, he still looked at her with admiration. In recent months, however, something has felt different. Not something blatant or obvious, but a subtle, almost imperceptible change. Small delays that didn't exist before, answers that were too short for simple questions, a slight distance that he couldn't tell if it was real or just an impression caused by tiredness from work. Nothing alarming. Just a feeling that, every now and then, crossed his mind. That night, as dinner continued, Daniel allowed himself to relax. The atmosphere was pleasant, conversations flowed and Sophia seemed comfortable by his side, even if she was constantly checking her phone. He noticed, but didn't ask questions. Maybe it was just some work issue that I needed to resolve, some last-minute issue. He chose to ignore. Over time, the tables emptied as some guests got up to chat with other colleagues or get a drink from the bar. Sophia also got up, saying she was going to the other end of the room to greet a friend she hadn't seen in a while. Daniel nodded, watching her walk away. He didn't think much about it. He stayed there for a few minutes, talking to a colleague, until he decided to go get another glass of wine. He got up, straightened his shirt cuffs and walked calmly across the room. It was then that his eyes caught a scene that, for a brief moment, he was unable to process. Sophia was sitting, but now accompanied. A man, whom Daniel didn't know, was at his side. Not just sitting close, but leaning slightly towards her, their faces at a minimum distance. Sophia didn't show any discomfort. On the contrary. Daniel stopped. His heart sped up. Something was wrong. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but this wasn't the kind of casual closeness between colleagues. There was an energy there, a complicity that made her stomach turn. He felt a weight in his chest, an uncomfortable sensation spreading throughout his body. The noise from the hall seemed distant now. The world around him became blurred, as if only that scene mattered. He tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that maybe he was just a friend, an acquaintance of Sophia's that he hadn't had the opportunity to meet yet. But then he noticed the way she looked at him. It wasn't the look of someone casually chatting with a colleague. It was the look of someone who knew the other intimately. Daniel's blood ran cold. His body went on alert. And then, unable to contain himself, he started walking towards them. Each step seemed to weigh more than the last. His heart was pounding in his chest. His breathing was shallow. When he got close enough to be noticed, he saw the man look up and stare at him, without fear, without embarrassment, as if he was prepared for that moment. Sophia's eyes widened when she saw him there, but there was no sudden movement of surprise. No expression of panic. Just a charged silence. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, and in that instant, he knew that his life would never be the same. Daniel stared at the man in front of him with a mixture of disbelief and contained anger. The room was still full of people, but the buzz of conversation and the clinking of glasses had disappeared for him. All that existed at that moment was Sophia and the stranger sitting next to her, and their eyes carried a story that he didn't yet know, but that he was already beginning to understand. Time seemed to slow down, making each second heavier. The man didn't look away. On the contrary, he held it with an air of silent defiance, as if he were already prepared for any confrontation. Sophia hesitated, moving her fingers under the table, as if looking for something to hold on to, but found nothing but her own discomfort. Daniel noticed the silence that hovered between them and felt a rush of adrenaline course through his body. Something was very wrong. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain control of the situation, but the tension in his chest was growing. If it was just a friend or colleague, she would have said something already. Anything. But Sophia remained motionless, with her lips parted, unable to formulate a single explanation. Her silence hurt him more than any response he could have heard. Then, he spoke. "Who are you?" His voice came out deeper than he intended, filled with an emotion he could barely contain. The man leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, as if he was analyzing the situation, as if he had rehearsed this moment countless times. He opened a half smile, that kind of expression that exudes confidence and, at the same time, provokes. "I'm someone who matters to her," she said with a firm tone, as if she wanted to make him even more uneasy. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at Sophia, waiting for her to deny it, to say it was a mistake, to clarify somehow. But she didn't say anything. Her wavering gaze betrayed everything her words dared not admit. Her silence burned more than any response. He closed his hands into fists and for an instant he felt an uncontrollable urge to pull that man out of the chair and demand answers in the only way his anger dictated. But no. That would not be the role he would take on. Instead, he turned to Sophia once again, waiting for her to take some action, to say anything that could at least try to alleviate the chaos that was forming inside him. "Aren't you going to say anything?" His voice was lower this time, but filled with pain. Sophia lowered her eyes, took a deep breath and then, with a tone of voice that was almost a whisper, she responded. "Not here." Those two words were enough to confirm everything. The ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. The company dinner, the people around, the glasses of wine, everything dissolved into a meaningless scenery. He felt the air thin, as if he were trapped in a place where there was a lack of oxygen. Without saying anything else, he took a step back and walked away from the table. His heart was beating fast, but at the same time it felt like something inside him had died. He turned and walked away from them, trying to process what had just happened. He left the room and went straight outside, feeling the cold night air touch his warm skin. His thoughts were jumbled, trying to piece together what had been in front of him for months and that he simply refused to see. Little signs, subtle changes, details that once seemed irrelevant now fit together like pieces of a painful puzzle. Minutes later, Sophia appeared at his side. She seemed hesitant, as if she didn't know where to start. He crossed his arms and waited. "I wanted to tell you before, but I didn't know how," she began, her voice cracking slightly. Daniel felt a wave of indignation rise within him. "Tell me before." "Before what, Sophia?" "Before I saw you with him, before I realized that my marriage was a lie." His voice was now filled with bitterness, disappointment and something deeper that he couldn't even name. She ran a hand through her hair nervously and took a deep breath. "I didn't want it to be like this." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just incredulity. "But it was, wasn't it? You let it be that way." Sophia swallowed. "Daniel, I didn't mean to hurt you." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if that could contain the pain, but when he opened them again he realized that nothing would stop it from growing inside him. "But you hurt. And what's worse, you knew it would hurt and you still chose to do it." She didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that would erase what was already done. The silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Finally, he took a deep breath and shook his head. "How long?" Sophia hesitated. "Daniel." "How long, Sophia?" he repeated, his voice firmer now. She looked down and murmured something that made his heart race. "A few months." He felt a bitter taste in his mouth. "Months?" he repeated, as if the word were something distant, impossible to process. Sophia tried to get closer, but he took a step back. "I never wanted to hurt you," she repeated, but this time her voice sounded weak, as if even she doubted her own words. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. "You've already hurt me." Silence settled once again. But now, it was different. Because it wasn't just any silence. It was the sound of something breaking. Something that might never be fixed again. And at that moment, Daniel realized that the betrayal was just the surface of what was really happening. The real blow was yet to come. Daniel felt the weight of betrayal like a direct blow to the chest. The revelation that Sophia was involved with another man was enough to make him question everything he had experienced with her, but there was something more, something he still couldn't name. It was as if the betrayal was just the tip of a much larger iceberg, and the coldness in Sophia's eyes, the absence of genuine guilt, indicated that the worst was yet to come. The next few days were a haze of conflicting emotions. He wavered between fury, disbelief and an overwhelming sense of loss. Sleeping became a challenge, and the quiet moments in his home were filled with memories that once brought him comfort, but were now memories distorted by lies. Every corner of that place carried Sophia's presence, and it consumed him. However, something didn't make sense. As much as he tried to rationalize, Daniel couldn't understand how Sophia had changed so abruptly. Yes, he had noticed the signs of distancing for some time, but betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It was as if there was a missing piece to this puzzle, something that explained the real reason behind her choice. That's when he decided to act. Without telling her, he went to the office where she worked. Not to confront her again, but to observe. He needed to understand what was happening, he needed to see with his own eyes if this betrayal went beyond what he imagined. And then, he saw it. Sophia was leaving the company building next to the man with whom she had cheated. The same one who faced him without hesitation that night. They were talking, but what caught his attention wasn't their proximity or the looks they exchanged. It was the way he held an envelope in his hands, handing it to her with a serious expression. Sophia took it and opened it right there, her eyes quickly scanning the contents of the pages. Her face transformed. There was panic in his expression. His lips parted, as if he was about to say something, but then closed. She looked around, as if she was sure no one was watching them, and then put the papers in her bag, saying something in a low, hurried tone before quickly walking away. Daniel felt a pang in his chest. There was something very wrong there. He didn't hesitate. He waited until Sophia got into the car and followed her. She drove slowly, but cautiously, as if she was fully aware that she could not be followed. But Daniel was persistent. He kept a safe distance, watching every movement, every turn made with precision. Then, she stopped. It was a bank. He parked a few spaces away and waited. Sophia got out of the car, entered the building and, a few minutes later, came out again, now holding a folder. Her face was tense, and she seemed to be breathing more rapidly. Daniel felt his heart race. There was something hidden there. He waited until she left and then, without hesitation, entered the bank. He knew the manager there, an old colleague who had helped him on other occasions. He went straight to the point, bluntly, asking for information about any unusual movements involving Sophia. What he discovered made his stomach turn. In recent months, Sophia had been withdrawing large amounts of money from a joint account they had, but which he rarely used. Absurd amounts. Money that was apparently being passed on to another account, a recipient whose name made his blood run cold. The lover. Daniel felt the world spinning around him. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It wasn't just a passing infidelity. Sophia was draining her own husband's finances to support the man she cheated on him with. The betrayal took on a new proportion. He left the bank in shock. Every piece of that story now fell into place in a cruel way. The distance, the empty excuses, the constant need to have your cell phone nearby. Sophia not only cheated on him, but used his own money to maintain this betrayal. What else was she hiding? He decided he wouldn't wait any longer. That same night, he went home and waited for Sophia to return. When she entered, he was sitting in the living room, his hands clasped, his mind racing. She saw him and hesitated for a second, but soon regained her composure. "We need to talk," he said, and his tone made her stop immediately. Sophia placed her bag on the table, crossed her arms and took a deep breath. "If it's about that night, I've said everything I have to say." Daniel let out a dry, humorless laugh. "No, Sophia. It's not about that night. It's about the money." Her eyes widened. He continued. "I know everything. I know you've been taking money from our accounts. I know you've been transferring it to him. I know this betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial." Sophia opened and closed her mouth, but found no words. Daniel stood up slowly, anger brimming with every movement. "You didn't just betray me, Sophia. You stole from me." She took a step back. "It's not what you think." He gave a bitter laugh. "So tell me, what is it? Because what it looks like to me is that while I was working, while I believed I had a marriage, you were taking the money I earned and giving it to him." Sophia ran her hands through her hair, breathing unevenly. "I needed to do this, Daniel." He narrowed his eyes. "Did I need it? What for?" There was silence. And then, for the first time that night, Sophia showed real regret. Not because of betrayal, but because of being discovered. Daniel took a step forward. "Speak, Sophia. I want to know why. I want to hear from you why you betrayed me and still thought you had the right to steal from me." She took a deep breath and then finally said, "Because he had to. He was being threatened." Daniel blinked, confused. "What the hell does that mean?" Sophia swallowed hard, as if she knew that, after what she said next, there would be no turning back. They were collecting a debt from him. A big debt. And I did what I needed to do to help him. Daniel felt the floor disappear. Sophia looked away, her hands shaking. "I did it because I love him." It was the last thing he needed to hear to know for sure. The woman with whom he shared years of his life, with whom he made plans, chose to lose everything for another man. And worse, he used his money to save this man. The betrayal was already unbearable. But what came after it was unthinkable. Daniel remained there, motionless, while Sophia's words echoed inside him like a definitive sentence. The air seemed thicker, difficult to breathe. His mind was spinning, trying to find some logic to what he had just heard, but nothing made sense. There was no justification, there was no acceptable excuse. She had made her choice. Not only did she betray him, but she took the money he entrusted to her, that they had built together, and gave it to another man. Not to start life over, not to escape, but to protect him, to save him from a consequence that he himself caused. Sophia took a step back, perhaps realizing that there was nothing more she could say that would alleviate what had already been done. Daniel watched her with an empty look, without any trace of the person who once loved her. That was it. There was nothing else. The woman before him was not the same one with whom he shared a life, with whom he made promises, with whom he once believed he had a future. He took a deep breath, controlling the wave of fury rising within him. You did this for him. He replayed her words in his mind, trying to absorb the weight of them. She chose. And he didn't choose it. He let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor there. Just a bitter pain, that burned inside. Sophia noticed his expression and her posture changed. Now there was fear in his eyes, perhaps not of what he might do, but of what would come next. Did you think of me at any point? His voice was low, but carried with something cold, definitive. Did it ever cross your mind what would happen if I found out? Sophia looked away, as if she couldn't bear to look at him. I thought I could fix things. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. To repair. Do you think there is a fix for this? Do you think that after everything you've done, after deceiving me, stealing from me, that I'll just understand? Sophia crossed her arms, as if trying to protect herself from his words, but there was no protection against the truth. I didn't expect you to understand. Daniel laughed again, but this time there was something dark in his laughter. Of course. Because this story was never about me. It was never about us. It was always about you and this man who, apparently, is worth more than everything we've built together. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to search for an answer within herself, but there was no more room for explanations. Everything had already been said. Daniel ran his hands over his face, feeling his entire body tense. He wanted to break something, he wanted to scream, he wanted to throw her out of the house right then, but at the same time, he wanted to see her sink into her own mistake. Did you realize what you lost? Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. And in that instant, Daniel knew. She knew. I knew nothing more could be done. There was a silence that stretched between the two, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then, he took a step back. I want you out of my house. Sophia looked at him with an unreadable expression. Daniel, please. Outside. She hesitated for a moment, as if she was still trying to find a way to reverse what was irreversible, but then she realized that there was no more room for pleading. He picked up his bag, his eyes shining with something he refused to believe was true regret. She left, leaving behind the weight of a story that could never be rewritten. As soon as the door closed, Daniel felt something inside him shatter. There was no relief, there was no satisfaction. Just an emptiness that seemed to consume everything around it. The silence in the house was deafening, filled with memories that were now nothing more than ruins of something that was once real. He looked around, every object, every photo, every trace of the life he built with Sophia, and felt as if everything was a scene from a distant past, something that no longer belonged to him. Anger gave way to exhaustion. He threw himself on the couch, staring at the ceiling, his mind flooded with everything that happened. He always believed that betrayal was a breach of trust, an emotional pain, but he never imagined it would be something so devastating. Sophia didn't just destroy their marriage. She destroyed the image he had of her. The hours passed and, with each passing minute, Daniel felt that something inside him was changing. He was no longer the man who trusted blindly, who believed that love and loyalty went together. He had been deceived, used, and now he needed to find a way to rebuild his life without Sophia's weight on his shoulders. It was then that his phone rang. He looked at the screen and felt a shiver run through his body. It was an unexpected call. A voice from the past, someone he hadn't seen in a long time, but who, in that moment, seemed to appear like a piece of ironic destiny. He answered. "Daniel, I heard what happened." He didn't respond right away. "I need to see you." For a moment, he hesitated. But then he realized that hesitation was no longer part of who he was becoming. He knew there was still a lot to be resolved. Sophia hadn't fallen alone, and the man she destroyed her marriage for was still around. But at that moment, in that unexpected call, something inside him lit up. Maybe that wasn't just the end. Maybe it was the start of something new. Daniel stared at the phone in his hand for a few seconds before finally responding. The voice on the other end of the line carried a worried tone, but he didn't want to hear pity. He didn't want to be remembered as the man betrayed, he didn't want his story to be reduced to that. But there was something in that call, an implicit invitation to start over. "Where are you?" The answer came quickly. "In a bar near the center." "You need to get out for a bit." He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to decide whether he should accept or simply sink deeper into that feeling of loss that still pulsed inside him. But then he realized that staying there, in that house full of distorted memories, wouldn't change anything. "I'm already going." Minutes later, Daniel walked through the bar door. The atmosphere was cozy, with soft lighting and a background of live music that mixed with the voices of people spread around the place. He saw Lucas, a friend from his college days, someone who was present in many phases of his life, but who, due to routine and the years, ended up moving away. Lucas waved when he saw him, raising a glass in greeting. "I didn't think you would come." Daniel sat on the next bench and ordered a drink without responding immediately. He looked around, taking in the unfamiliar faces, the way people talked and laughed as if nothing could shake their lives. "I think I needed to get out of my house." Lucas let out a sigh and leaned forward slightly. "Man, I heard about what happened." Daniel twirled the glass between his fingers before looking up. "I imagine so." Lucas shrugged. "It's amazing how fast these things go." There was a brief silence before he continued. "And now? What are you going to do?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh and took a sip of the drink. "I think that's the big question, isn't it?" Lucas nodded, but didn't insist. They remained silent for a few moments, just watching the bar move by. But then, something happened. A soft, feminine voice appeared beside them. "Daniel?" He turned his face and met a pair of familiar eyes. Camila, an old friend, someone he hadn't seen in years. She seemed surprised to see him there, but there was something in her expression, a mixture of nostalgia and curiosity. "I knew what happened." He smiled sideways, without emotion. "It seems like everyone knew." Camila sat next to him, ordering a drink. "Are you well?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "What do you think?" She watched him for a few seconds before speaking. "I think you are strong. I think you'll come out of this better than you know." Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer than he intended. There was something comforting in Camila's presence, something that made his mind distract, even if momentarily, from the confusion of the last few days. Lucas cleared his throat and raised his glass. "Well, since we're here, I think we should toast." Camila arched her eyebrow, amused. "Toast to what?" Lucas smiled. "To the fresh start." Daniel hesitated for a moment, but then raised his glass, feeling that perhaps this was the first time since everything happened that he had been able to breathe without feeling a crushing weight on his chest. To the fresh start. The night continued unexpectedly. Conversations flowed, laughter arose and, for a moment, Daniel felt that he could recover something he had lost long before Sophia's betrayal, himself. Hours later, when he left the bar, he felt the cold night air against his skin and realized that, for the first time, he wasn't thinking about revenge. He wasn't thinking about what he had lost. I thought about what I could still live for. But fate still had one last twist in store for him. When he got home, he found Sophia standing at the door. He stopped, feeling his anger resurface, but took a deep breath. "What are you doing here?" Sophia looked haggard, her eyes swollen, her body huddled inside her coat. "I needed to talk to you." He ran a hand over his face tiredly. "I think we've said enough." She hesitated before continuing. "I was wrong." Daniel crossed his arms, watching her. "It took a while to realize that, didn't it?" She took a deep breath. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I messed up. But I needed to see you, I needed to say that I regret it." Daniel laughed, but this time there was no pain, just disbelief. "And what do you want me to do with this, Sophia?" She took a step forward. "I want to fix things." He watched her for a moment, evaluating those words. But then, something inside him just snapped. "You want to fix things because it went wrong for you. You want to fix it because now you realize it wasn't worth it. But you know what? I already fixed it. I fixed it by getting rid of you." Sophia blinked, seeming surprised by the firmness of his response. "Daniel, I still love you." He took a step back, as if those words were toxic. "No, Sophia. You love what you lost." She opened her mouth to say something, but he raised his hand, cutting her off. "Go away." This time, there was no hesitation in his tone. There were no more doubts. And Sophia noticed. She lowered her head, took a deep breath, and without another word, turned and walked away. Daniel watched as she disappeared into the darkness, and then, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had won. Not because he took revenge, not because he made her suffer, but because he was finally free. And freedom was so much sweeter than any revenge could be. Time passed, and with it, the scars began to turn into distant memories. Daniel was no longer the man who froze when he saw his wife sitting next to another man that night. He was no longer the man trying to understand where he had failed, where he had missed the signs. I was no longer the victim of a marriage built on lies. He was someone different now, someone who had learned to survive pain, to rebuild his own identity without having to carry the weight of the past. Sophia, on the other hand, faced the consequences of her choices. After Daniel kicked her out of his life, she tried to move on, but reality crashed down on her like an inevitable punishment. The man for whom she destroyed her marriage, for whom she risked everything, for whom she stole, simply disappeared. The money she had embezzled was not enough to cover his debts, and she soon realized that she had been used in the same way she had used Daniel. He tried to get in touch, tried to rescue what was left of that story, but all he found was silence. She was abandoned, without love, without money, without anyone to take her in. She lost prestige at work. Rumors spread, people started to avoid her. That woman previously admired for her elegant and professional posture was now seen as someone who destroyed her own life through an unforgivable mistake. Before long, he ran out of options. He needed to sell what was left, he needed to accept that he would never recover what he lost. Regret became his only companion, but he arrived too late. The man she risked everything for, the one who held the money that didn't belong to her, met an even worse end. He thought he could run away, that he could hide from the wrong people, but time was unforgiving. Collectors don't forget, and when they finally found him, there were no negotiations, there was no more time to escape. He paid the price for the choices he made, in a way Sophia never knew. And Daniel? He started again. At first, it was difficult. The ghost of what he lived still haunted, still echoed in some silent nights. But then, the unexpected happened. Little by little, someone appeared in his life. Camila, his old friend who had reappeared at the right time, began to occupy a space he never imagined would open again. It wasn't an immediate romance, it wasn't something forced. But it was natural. She was there when he needed her, without demanding anything in return, without rushing. With her, he learned to allow himself to feel again. When he finally realized, he no longer thought about Sophia. I no longer felt angry. He no longer wanted revenge. I just kept moving forward, building something new, something real. The last time he saw Sophia was by chance. She was in a cafe, sitting alone, staring into space. The tired face, the deep circles under his eyes, the expression of someone who knew he had lost everything. She saw him, and for a moment, he thought she would get up, that she would say something. But then, she just looked away, as if she no longer had the strength to face her own past. And it was at that moment that Daniel was sure, he won. Not because Sophia was defeated, but because he was free. Free from pain, free from resentment, free from betrayal. The end for each of them was the result of the choices they made. Some lost everything. Others learned, grew, moved on. And now, tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your comment, I want to know your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more impactful stories like this. Here, we do not support and will never romanticize betrayal. Betrayal destroys, betrayal takes a high toll, and often, when the person realizes the mistake, it is already too late. Until next time.